Welcome to this very special edition of ACM's Vault of Cult. Normally we talk about films that weren't hits or critically acclaimed from the 80s or 90s, very occasionally 70s. But on this very special episode we're going back even further to the 1950s. British comedy starring Norman Wisdom, Up in the World. Norman Wisdom was huge in the UK in that era, and his movies were shown on terrestrial television when I was a kid in the 1980s and early 90s. Many of us grew up watching his work. He was the first stand-up I ever saw live. His movies are very special to me and to a lot of people, not just my age range, I'm 40, but people a few years older as well. A lot of years older. Some would have even seen them in the cinema. They're still shown on smaller channels nowadays and available on DVD, but not so well known, not as out there as they were when I was younger. Once again got as my special guest James Rowe from King Street Cinema, of my age, aware of Norman Wisdom's work but never actually watched one of his movies. So I showed him Up in the World, which is my personal favourite one. Not his most well-known film, not his biggest hit movie, but for me it was my favourite growing up. I'm not really sure why, so I'll touch on that on the podcast. So yeah, give it a listen if you're new to Norman Wisdom's work. So do give it a listen. You might find it very interesting. He definitely influenced a lot of comedy afterwards, and he was inspired by a lot of more well-known classic stuff from before. I really enjoyed watching this movie again, and you know what? I think James enjoyed it too. But have a listen.
Didn't you do your homework last night?
I went to the pictures instead, sir.
Do you think that was wise?
No, sir. It was wisdom.
And it was at this mighty mansion of 1,000 windows that Norman got a job as a window cleaner.
Give him a good spit and polish.
Oh, I'm going to need an awful lot of spit, aren't I?
This is Sir Reginald Vanderbilt, whose home it was. His pocket money didn't suffer from the credit squeeze.
This represents an increase over the last 12 months of 4,500,000.
It's nice to know that the dear boy will be fairly comfortably off.
But there was a dangerous gang of crooks plotting to throw a thunderbolt into that happy little home.
The legend, he's gone. Kidnappers. Well, do something. Don't just stand there. Do something. Sound the alarm.
Matching his wits against the desperate gang, Norman gets into every possible and impossible situation in one of the stately homes of England, winning the hearts of all who meet him. Performing the most dazzling feats of athletic skill and defying at least half a dozen fates worse than death. You'll fight to get into this picture starring Norman Wisdom, just as all the actors fought to get out of his way.
I've a feeling of being so up in the world when I'm walking out with you.
If you weep when their love story doesn't run smooth, that's sympathy. If you tremble when Norman faces mortal danger, that's nervousness. And if you shriek with laughter at 1,001 crazy situations, that's wisdom.
Let our hearts take flight together up in the world.
James, thanks once again for joining us. How are you?
I'm pretty hot. It's a warm day.
I don't know when this episode will go out, so it might go out in the winter.
All right.
And people are like, oh.
Well, right now it's like 30 degrees, so
Yeah,
and we're in a fairly hot room as well.
Yeah,
so.
sorry.
It's okay.
So we might hear background noise because there's windows open. We're upstairs in a flat above a pub, but the pub's currently closed, so it shouldn't be that noisy, but you never know. If you're a regular listener, you'll know we have put out some comic book superhero episodes. This episode's recorded in the middle of that. I just needed a break from it. So we're talking about a 1950s British comedy, Up in the World, starring Norman Wisdom, who was massive in his day. James, what do you know about Norman Wisdom? Have you seen any of his films before?
I have not seen any of his films before. Obviously know the name. He's an extremely famous guy who's around for a very long time. And yeah, I've seen sort of skits of his, but I've never seen like a whole movie before. And he was on TV, wasn't he? So they had TV shows and stuff. And
yeah, I mean, of our age,
big variety guy.
We're both 40. I grew up, I would watch his films. They would be on BBC Two sort of afternoons, probably before I even started school. I was watching them. My parents and grandparents would video them for me once I got to school. I'd watch that, and I had a few bought for me as gifts, birthdays. This would have been like pre-high school when I was watching these films. I was watching these films at the same time as maybe animated films. You know, like what did I watch recently? Secrets of Nim, that sort of thing, and the Disney films and Star Wars and these sort of movies. Norman Wisdom ones regularly in my household, along with, say, Carry On films, even George Formby, that sort of thing, which kind of not shown. Norman Wisdom films aren't shown on regular TV anymore, but they will be on Sky channels like Talking Pictures, the old people channel. Basically, they were shown for kids when I was younger. They aren't now. Is that right?
Definitely. I mean, I personally don't remember Norman Wisdom as when I was of that age, but when I was of that age, there were many others of the old, even older, like Harold Lloyd was one of my favourites. So my parents showed me, just loved all those shorts, and they were on TV as well, I think, a little bit. Yeah, definitely. And you know, Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, who's my personal favourite. So the old silent was more what I saw at that age. Rather than let's say like the British 50s and 60s comedies. Though there were a couple of those, more 60s than 50s. But the other thing that I had that was very British was the Goons. That's what I had growing up from my parents. I used to listen to the Goons all the time. So
I think some cast members of the Goons would have crossed over and worked with Norman Wisdom. I've got to look it up, but I get the feeling Harry Seeker might have been in one of his films.
It's very possible.
And I know, that sort of era. I mean, when Thora Hird was around at that time as an actress, she was in one of his films. And these movies were very influenced by Chaplin, Buster Keaton.
Definitely.
And it was kind of the next generation, really. Charlie Chaplin said himself that... I don't know the exact quote, but basically he found Norman Wisdom the funniest guy since himself, which is quite an
I think he said his favourite clown.
Favourite clown, okay.
Yeah, I think that's the line.
There's something that he basically really bigged him up.
Yeah.
If you've seen the movie, have you seen Stan and Laurel? Stan and Ollie.
Yeah.
They in that. It's the end of their career, and they're coming over to the UK, and they mention Norman Wisdom quite a lot because he's the big thing at the time.
Yeah.
And I know Norman Wisdom was a massive fan of Laurel and Hardy, and in the film it sort of says that they resent him a bit. I don't. They probably appreciated his work, but probably were a bit, because he is doing the same sort of thing. But it's no different to look at our growing up when everyone loved Oasis, and it's just the next Beatles. Same thing. Some would say watered down, but it's for that next generation.
Some might say.
So yes, well, that's very, very. I don't like Oasis. I wouldn't know the reference. This film was the fourth starring vehicle for him, and the reason I picked this one is simply because it was the one I watched the most as a kid. It is my favourite one, and rewatching them all over the last sort of probably 10 years, I don't think it's a standout one from the other ones. Possibly it's sillier. There's a lot more humour. It's less sentimental than a lot of his films.
Okay.
But there is some of that in there. It's kind of uneven. The basic premise is Norman works as a window cleaner at like a big mansion for a rich family. Sure. There are some villain types who look very Dick Tracy villain, who want to kidnap the son, basically, to get money, isn't it?
I think so.
And they're for some reason the only way they can kidnap this son is to be the window cleaner.
Yeah.
And the job set up. The previous 2 window cleaners have been injured at work, and there's a comic scene how he gets the job.
Yes.
Instead of the person they've planted to do it. And there's several people on the inside anyway at this mansion.
Yeah.
Who I don't see why they couldn't just
Absolutely,
get back.
yeah. Sure.
But it's not about the plot. I think one of them is the caretaker from Grange Hill.
Oh, okay.
I think I meant to look that up. So basically, the first basic 40 minutes of this movie is that basic setup. Him getting to he initially gets fired from his original job, and then there's him getting the job. It's sort of done in almost sort of 5-minute comic sketches each thing.
Yeah.
He'll go to the it opens with he's putting a big advertising poster up, and this is spoiler heavy, and it turns out he's put it over windows and they all open.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's the opening gag. It's not really spoiling the
and it was the trailer as well, I think.
Right. The next main gag is actually my favourite joke of the whole film, which is the Q joke
At the Labour Exchange.
Yeah, that's my favourite.
That's very old school slapstick, and well done, well choreographed,
but it's also very British.
Yeah.
This is why I think I liked it a lot, because I thought, right, well, this is not an American joke. This is not something that's been stolen from America. This is a very British joke about people queuing, about people wanting to be in the right queue for the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. It's a very, very British thing, because we apparently love queuing.
Yeah. And he comes up once again on top, but very accidentally.
Yes.
And then goes to get his fingerprints done for the past. There's a very slapsticky.
That is again fantastic, good old-fashioned humour.
Yeah.
With alongside a very famous actor whose name I'm forgetting. Oh, I got it written down somewhere, but it was in many, many things. Yes, Lionel Jeffries, who was in many, many, many movies. Most people probably will remember him from Chitty Bang Bang. He plays the grandfather in that.
Of course, yeah.
And he's just great in it. He's only in this one scene, but he's fantastic.
This movie, like a lot of non-wisdoms, are full of these British character actors who you see in these 50s films, and later on they'd appear in 70s sitcoms. There's a lot of crossover with, say, Steptoe and Son, this sort of thing, and that's one of them. Then there's he gets the job, and there's the slapstick gate opening scene where he ends up breaking a branch in the doorbell, and then he basically meets the other characters. The Major, who is played by an actor who's in loads of his films as the straight man, Jerry Desmond, who I think is great. Actually, he's the very stern, serious. He's kind of that likable, but you love seeing him get angry. Yeah, and he gets angry a lot, doesn't he?
He does. He's got a very good sort of pompous, very upper class British, speech, way of talking, and just being all sort of.
I love in this that he rides about on a horse.
Yes,
and
this is 3 miles from the gate to the sort of main area. So he rides on a horse, and Norman has to walk basically.
Yeah.
Which is
he's in several of his films. One of my favourites is a film called The Early Bird, where Norman's a milkman who works for a small company, and Jerry Desmond runs Consolidated Dairies, a massive dairy what tries to take over. There's a hilarious scene where they're on a golf course, and just them two playing golf. Him Norman. There's the line I love. Oh no, the balls fell down that little hole, and he's just winding him up accidentally, trying to be nice, but everything he does winds him up, and that's kind of what this guy's here for. Great. He ended up being a game show host.
Right.
What
was the game show?
In America, it was the $64,000.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
He hosted that in the 60s.
Oh, okay.
But tragically, he took his own life a year after his wife died in the late 60s. Right. Suffered from depression badly, which is depression and comic actors seem to go hand in hand, which is a shame. But Norman Wisdom was one of those who lived well into his 90s.
Yeah, he did.
And was still working till the end. Yeah. In various forms. But
is he on EastEnders or something, or some Coronation Street?
He had a cameo in Coronation Street, and he was in Lost of Summer Wine towards the end. Not a regular, but his character came in a few times.
Right.
The last thing I remember him, they'd done a movie of 5 children in it, and he was very briefly
Oh yeah,
in that.
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, he was in, but literally working up until his 90s.
Yeah,
and loved it. He loved it. I saw him live twice when he'd have been in his 70s or 80s then when I was a kid. Played the Felixstowe Park Spa Pavilion. Brilliant, which was nice. So we meet the Major. Yes, and we meet Jeannie, the love interest of the film. Yes, who.
Yeah, I mean, these are the bits in the film where I'm not interested. Not because it's necessarily romantic stuff and taken away from the comedy, but it's just not done very well, I don't think.
It's cliche.
It's extraordinarily cliche, and she's not very good. And I don't think it's necessarily her fault. It's the way the women are written. It's of the very much of the time. It's very old-fashioned and just ugh.
Yeah.
So it's just for today's audience. I mean, it's something that just
it's
wouldn't appeal. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean,
the way they do
the love interest isn't really needed in it.
It's completely irrelevant.
And there's 2 youngish women in the film.
Yes.
Both of which fall madly in love with Norman for no reason.
Yes.
And there's this really nasty other woman who works there as well, who instantly is attracted to Norman. He favours Jeannie for whatever reason. And they
saw her first, I think. I think that's basically it.
And there's someone like the scene on the big wheel.
Yeah.
Where it's the break for kids in these old films where they can go to the toilet or get sweets where they sing. This would happen. Dean Martin would sing in the Jerry Lewis films. I always saw that as the break for the kids. We're not interested, but they do a song.
Yeah.
Which would have been a single at the time and then made money.
It's right in the middle of the film.
Yeah, title track. The song's called Up in the World, and she just sabotages this ride.
Yeah.
Quite nastily.
I mean, she does have a big smile on her face, and
then she's there with a bloke anyway.
Yeah.
She's on a date and still sabotages.
I mean, the whole rivalry is not. I mean, we get that there is meant to be a rivalry, but it's so low key as far as her interest. I mean, why is she interested in Norman? There's no reason that she would be, other than he's just a man that's there, and he's the star of the show.
Yeah,
I mean,
but he's a likeable, and he'd do anything for you kind of guy. But they don't know this yet.
No, it just
maybe she's seen his other films. But there is a bit in it where he's cleaning the windows and he's singing "Don't Laugh at Me" to himself, which was from his first film and a big hit. I like that little nod.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah,
and he always plays Norman.
Yeah,
which is
not Norman Wisdom.
No, normally it's Norman Pitkin.
That's right.
And
I read that.
Yeah, and what was the country he was massive in?
Albania.
Yeah, and he was just known as Pitkin over there.
No.
And they were literally the only films they could release there.
Yeah, the only films from the West.
Yeah.
were allowed were Norman Wisdom films.
Yeah, because we'll get to this later. There's nothing. They're known for being nothing offensive in the films, but there's a few things in this one that you certainly wouldn't do now. Not many, but there are a couple of things.
And even them, they're still you wouldn't do them today, just because they're just not very good.
Yeah.
But they're very sort of very low key offensiveness. It's not.
It's nothing that I don't think if it was shown on TV now during the day it'd be cut.
Yeah, I don't know.
No. But then we meet. Well, I was just going to mention as well the Jeannie character, the actress, Maureen Swanson. She's only got 18 credits, some more serious films, to be honest. But she married the 4th Earl of Dudley, and then basically retired.
Yeah, which, as you do.
Yeah. So that's my plan, is to marry a rich, famous podcaster and then just retire from this non-paid job. But yeah, she's. I thought she was fine, to be honest. So you said not very good. She's no worse than any of these female leads. It's a shame that they didn't give her some comedy to do as well.
That's true. There is none. I mean, she plays a part, sort of not comedy, but certainly involved in Wisdom shenanigans to an extent, certainly. But yes, there's no real comedy.
There's later on in the film, he ends up going to prison, and she 100%. She's there for him. She's like his rock, so to speak.
Of course, that's her role in the film. Yeah.
So it's nice, but not very real.
Not very real. Not very empowering. Not very
But one thing I did notice, and for the film made in 1956, she's the one who asks him out. Right at the beginning. It's not. He doesn't chase her or anything. Like often in these films, and even up until sort of 90s romantic comedies, it would be that a bloke for whatever reason falls madly in love with her, spends the film lying to her to try to get her on side, and then his female best mate. She's been here all along. They could have done that, and it would have been probably worse.
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, it was. That is true, absolutely. It's not like Fred Astaire being 30, 40 years older, chasing a young girl for half of the film, and then, she decides, I love him now for no reason.
Yeah.
He's just been stalking me all this time, and now I'm in love with him.
Romantic comedies are weird. But also, they seem about the same age. I think he would have probably been a good 10 years older than her. I mean, he's playing younger than he is.
Yeah, because he's in his 40s, isn't he?
He must be by this, because he had been doing stage stuff for years before he got into film, but he's playing the average man. He's probably meant to be about 30, I reckon. And she's probably mid-20s.
Sort of thing,
and he's not a noticeable difference, which is nice.
No, it's very true. And they are meant to be of the same sort of say class. In that sense. So he's not some sort of person with loads of power and control. Like you say, she's interested in him and sort of asks him out first, and he's very coy and meek about it.
He's sort of underplayed, but it might be the fact that he appears to be like the only person there who's nice when you think about it.
To be perfectly honest, that's probably true.
They're sort of background characters, and I shouldn't, because it's a bit dated the character. I like the character of Morris, one of the actors.
Morris is one of is probably the best character, most interesting character in it. And yes, he is gay coded, clearly. But fine.
It's the sort of character that maybe Kenneth Williams might have played.
Yeah, completely. But more coded than that. A little bit again, more low key. Again, that the whole film does play on the sort of more low key.
Played by Michael Ward, who was a character actor who was in loads of things. I'm sure he popped up in things like Are You Being Served and that sort of thing later on. Great character actor, mainly comedy. He plays one of two uncles. We haven't mentioned the lad who they tried to kidnap, Sir Reginald, which is a very interesting character because he is an arsehole. Yeah,
terrible, awful child.
But they all like him in a weird way. And you first meet him by he catapults something up Norman's backside, and then he ends up doing a booby trap where he's tied from a tree upside down.
That's right.
Where then Jenny appears and says, "What you doing?" He says, "Just hanging around." So there are some verbal humour in this as well. But he's just this horrible child. But then
who's also a racist.
There is that one line, isn't there? Should we mention that now?
Yeah, might as well.
There's a comical football scene which I quite like.
Yes.
Where there's the staff putting a football match. The outside staff versus inside staff, and Sir Reginald's team has to win.
Always.
Sir Reginald always wins, is what they keep saying. And Norman is oblivious to this and just plays.
He just wants to play the game.
Plays the game,
like he says.
And he does show that. Play the game.
Play the game. That's right.
It's quite a funny scene. I think I quite like it, and they end up putting him in goal because he keeps scoring.
Yes, right.
And he ends up in mud, covered in mud. And he looks up. And Sir Reginald shouts, "Where's your banjo?" Obviously a racial. This was on TV probably 10 years ago. I think it was still in. And it's one of those agreed by. Why can't you make jokes like that anymore? Was about this joke, which I hadn't even picked up on until recently. And you wouldn't make that joke anymore.
No, because it's just not very. It's just not very good. As a joke, it's not. It's like, ugh, really.
But it does show him to be the nasty character at that point in the film he's supposed to be. That's the only thing. Norman wouldn't have made that joke in this film.
No.
So that's the only, and that's one of two things I think you wouldn't do. Now, there's fancy dress at the end, and there's a bit of dressing up as racial stereotypes, which you would have probably done well up until the 90s, that humour.
Oh, completely, it's Austin Powersy sort of thing.
So they're the two things. But Reginald, interestingly, I mentioned this Norman Wisdom. I mentioned a few Norman Wisdom groups on Facebook. So Reginald is still alive, the actor who played him. and he's active in one of the groups and just
okay.
talk about
That's cool.
what a great time he had in it.
Oh, brilliant.
I assume it's him, and why would someone make that up? They wouldn't, would they? Yeah, and he acted for a bit up until the sort of 60s, and then I don't know, maybe he'd still done stage and stuff. He must be getting on now, though. I mean, this film.
Yeah, I mean, how old is he in the movie? He's probably about 12 or something.
Yeah,
would you
probably
say?
a bit older, possibly.
Maybe they say he's 14.
14, yeah.
So yeah, so
yeah, probably 14, 15.
So he'd be in his 80s now.
Close to that, because the film is 60. Yes, he would be 80. He's 66 years old, the film.
Yeah.
So yeah, he'd be,
be about 80 years old, maybe.
And he can work Facebook, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, actually, most people on Facebook are of that age now. Kids don't go on it, do they?
That's true.
So yeah, I mean, that's really nice. So the character of his mum, Lady Vanderbilt, very stereotypical, pompous.
Faints at any chance, any chance she has to faint, she will.
Yeah. But I find that funny. That's and there's a nice relationship between her and she's Sybil, isn't she? Sybil Bound and Morris. They obviously like brother and sister who generally love each other, but just weird.
Is Morris meant to be the tutor?
I thought he was
the child, or is he?
He is an uncle.
He's an uncle, right?
Yeah, but he does tutor.
Yeah, that's right.
And he's And then there's the other uncle who's just like this. Yeah. Also quite sort of. He means well, but he's just, oh, snap out of it. He's like,
well, send the kid to boarding school.
Yeah, we don't have this trouble.
Yeah.
And it's kind of. And weirdly, you can kind of relate to both of them.
Yes.
Because one of them is the wants to bring him up like properly, lovingly, and the other. And the other ones were like, well, he's an idiot.
Yeah, yeah. Just send him off.
Yeah, he wouldn't be.
Get him some discipline.
Yeah, you need the balance between the two.
Yeah.
But that kind of works, that whole thing. And it is very sitcom-y.
Yeah.
But I like that, and I like it's really over the top characters. I mean, for it to work, I mean, the kid's got to be, he's got to be annoying, and he's got to be and there isn't really much apart from that because Norman's so nice, they end up getting on.
Okay, so this part of the plot is that Norman is fired.
Yeah,
but the kid wants him to stay. So and whatever he wants, he gets. So he gets to come back, and he wants him to stay because he likes him.
Yeah.
Again, not really unexplained why. Probably because he sees a bit of himself. He goes, "Oh, he's a bit of a prankster as well," and
And he's in same in all of his films. And when I've seen interviews with him in real life, he's always happy. And when the scenes he's in with the other workers, he's got even though he's getting bullied.
Yeah,
he's usually the chirpy, happy. So that kind of you can see why people like him. But then saying that, a mate of mine I lent this film to probably 15 years ago now, who watched it when I was a kid, never watched this one, and said this was the one film he found him annoying in.
Right.
That's one thing I was going to ask. Do you find the character likeable or annoying, or a bit of both?
A bit of both. There are many times, good. Handful of times where his voice just was very grating.
Yeah.
When you know when it is when he's doing the high pitched sort of whiny, squealy voice that he does when he's a bit annoyed or not getting his way or something, and or people aren't listening to him.
Yeah, but it's nothing on, say, Jerry Lewis's voice.
Oh no, nothing at all.
So I mean, this is one of the reasons I do this podcast is I grew up from I can't remember a time when I didn't watch or like Norman Wisdom films. So for me, the character's kind of embodied in me. Mm-hmm. So I don't find it annoying. But if I step back, I can see some people might.
Yeah. It's not the worst by a long way. But I definitely was like, oh, he's doing it again. It's a bit annoying.
Yeah. But he's not overkill with it.
No.
And I mean, and he basically does play, which is a very British comedy thing for the time. He plays an exaggerated, probably version of himself, very exaggerated, but a lot of it is probably his mannerisms when he was younger and that sort of thing. I was going to mention as well. We've mentioned the other characters, the villains. The main villain is. Did he go on to be in a soap or something? He looked really familiar.
I don't know,
but I think he might.
Then they're not in it very much.
No, and they're very that cliche gangster wearing hats.
Yeah, and they sort of turn up. So they're at the beginning where they try and do the setup so they can get the guy in to do the window cleaning.
Yeah,
and then they see them a little bit in the middle, and it's mostly at the end where they come, for final act.
When he gets arrested because he's. I'll quickly summarise. He takes Reginald to London to see his favourite
That's right.
magician.
Yeah.
He does it because he traps him in the window and tickles his feet.
Yeah.
If I was Norman, I'd have said I've done it, then not taken him.
Sure.
But I think he secretly wants to go himself. He's in the
Yeah, he's a fan.
He's a fan, but doesn't get the act because he ends up ruining the act, which is one of his old stage routines.
Yeah.
Put into the film,
Right.
and that bit's I kind of like it, but it's kind of
The magician, don't know the name. It was just a little bit of
Edwin Styles.
Yeah. Okay. So he was a stage comedic actor of the time, and probably worked with Wisdom. So they probably had done that routine.
Oh, they had.
Before.
Yeah, that was something
right.
they used to do.
Right.
It was literally when they were working together. I can't find that gangster now. I'm going to stop looking. The magician's act often wouldn't go down as well as they wanted to. So that what happens in the film is what they kind of done.
Yeah.
But then Norman would come on later and do his routine because well before he's famous, I think it was no one knew who he was.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's where that comes in. You can sort of tell.
Yeah.
But
that's okay.
But it's
You know.
nice. It's nice that they throw some of the other stuff in. I mean, Lauren Hardy used to do it, as did the Marx Brothers. Would take their films on the road before they done them and did.
Well, the Marx Brothers come from all of them really come from stage, either it's vaudeville or musical backgrounds. So
and it doesn't. It's obviously another sort of set piece, so to speak, or just but it kind of it builds to the finale, and it's not like this is a film of just jokes just thrown at you. But I can see that being some people's favourite scene from the film if they're a fan of that sort of, and it's very of its time because I keep saying magicians were a lot bigger back then than now.
Oh, absolutely. It's a good scene. Yeah. It's a good scene for a look back at sort of like you say, an older kind of from the stage, from a stage show. You can see it's from a stage show to them being on television, and it's in the film, and it's nice. It's nice to see that. There's another scene as well, if you're talking about sort of maybe people's favourite scenes, which we haven't mentioned, which I think might be another one, which is where he plays the drums. And Norman plays the drums, and it's a sort of it's a fish out of water kind of scene, which is pretty much all of them. But this one, especially where he thinks he's in a room where the staff are, but it turns out he's in a room where sort of the guests of the lady of the house.
It is basically a tea party going on, isn't it? Yeah.
And so he's talking to them like he's one of them.
Yeah.
And they don't obviously see him as one of them. Think, what's this man doing here? And he's trying to liven them up and get them sort of going and dancing. And he gets Morris to play the piano.
It's Greensleeves, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he gets Morris to rock up Greensleeves.
Yeah, just to sort of jazz it up a bit, sort of 50s style. And then he realises there's a drum kit, and he starts being like Gene Krupa on the drums and doing some jazz, cool 50s drumming. Yeah. And it's great. I mean, I really like that scene. As a routine kind of let's see how far we can take this before all the stiffs start getting annoyed, kind of thing. I like that.
Yeah, and that's one thing I do. I mean, there's a lot of slapstick humour. Some works a lot more than others, but I don't think any of the jokes go too far or warm thin. I think they know when to stop the joke and then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I think that's great because they're family films and. It's back then people probably had better attention spans, but they do know their audience, and it's not like later on with say maybe Python would drag a joke out or whatever.
Well, that's part of the joke. But
with this, it's let's get as many in as possible.
Yeah, and it's very well choreographed as far as what is happening in camera, not necessarily what the camera is doing. So it's a movie that wants to really showcase Wisdom.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So,
going back to plot, they go to see the magician, and the nightclub they see him in. This kid gets into a nightclub. That's sort of. I don't think he would have been allowed in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, sure, it's one of them things that you can just say, "Well, who do you know who I am?" sort of thing. I'm
the kidnapped child. But the nightclub's run by the gangsters who are trying to kidnap him. So these gangsters must have money. So what?
Oh yeah, all the gangsters. Yeah, sure.
So it's like
they've got a club.
So it's like that, and then it all goes wrong. The police show up and they arrest Norman because the criminals trick the police into thinking he's their boss.
Yeah.
Instantly thrown into prison with some character actors, one of which is the awesome Bernard Bresslaw.
Yes, very young. Very young Bernard Bresslaw.
And I love the bit where they talk about why they're in prison. They're all like, murder, 25, and he's like, only 11 years. Which is great. And he's denying much of it, but it's one of those, probably just before he'd been in Carry-On films.
Yeah, it must be, right?
He might have been in one or two early ones in smaller roles. So a lot of these actors in Carry-Ons, they're in the early ones a little bit. They go. But it's good to see him in that. It's good to see these two on screen together, to be honest. Big fan of Bernard Bresslaw. I'd like him. He's in like Hawk the Slayer and stuff like that in his later career. And then he's in prison. There's the comedy Escape. Yeah,
which is good. Again, another nice routine with the ladder. Yeah.
And then once he's escaped, he gets back to the mansion. In this time, the reason Sir Reginald, who gets knocked on he gets hit by a gangster, doesn't he, at some point? He
gets knocked around quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, he probably deserves it. But he gets hit by one of the thugs or whatever, and he's got amnesia.
That's right.
And he also, as well as...
I found that difficult to believe.
Also, he doesn't just lose his memory, he loses his personality and sense of humour.
Yes.
And he just sits there studying.
Yes. He's become a completely different person.
Yeah, and we all know that if you get hit on the head...
hard enough.
You turn French and your name's Frog. That's just the Flintstones. But I mean, that's just a plot thing. So because they'd be like, well, he'd
just wake up and go, well, Norman's cool. You know?
So Norman escapes and conveniently gets to the mansion when there's a fancy dress thing going on.
Yes.
Where most people are dressed. Jeannie, who's Scottish anyway, is just dressed more Scottish.
Yeah.
And then Norman, for the second time in the film, ends up dressing up as a woman to get
for a sort of Arabian, maybe? Yeah. I'm not quite sure. I think so.
But it comes across as a bit racist, but it's so his face is covered.
He's got a veil and, he's wearing...
So the Major can be attracted to him.
Yeah, again, I mean, look, it's the sort of... This is the kind of humour that I would... if it's not done ironically, like going, hey, remember when people used to find this kind of thing funny? I just go, I don't find it funny at all.
But the good thing about Wisdom films is that humour is very of its time, and that humour is in these films, but only in small parts.
Yeah, sure.
So I do like a lot of the old Carry-On films, but there's so much of that that it's tedious.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, there's just a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, sure.
And it's probably it's the films are meant to be crowd pleasers, and that's what was popular at the time.
Oh, completely. Yeah, I mean, they just go, I bet people we're just laughing, just uncontrollably in the cinemas watching this,
and then turn into their partners and just checking. But the same sort of thing, if you go, I mentioned the Flintstones, but in these sort of cartoons the same sort of humour would happen.
Yeah.
And it's just put a dress on and the villain always falls in love with the one they're hiding from, and I get why that humour works. I've got to be honest. It's but like I say, it's the main thing with this is it's the big slapstick, and they add jokes. I mean, there's a few sort of comic lines in this. I mean, it's not in this film, but one of my favourite Norman Wisdom lines is when he has to call an ambulance and someone says, he basically calls an ambulance and says, how long will it be? And he says, about 12 foot.
Yeah.
Right? Jokes like that.
But there's a joke similar, probably not as good in this one, that's like that, where it's about time, I think.
It's I've written this down.
Yeah.
You should have been here when you get late for. You should have been here at 9 o'clock this morning. Why? What happened?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. It is good.
And that's. I mean, I love slapstick, but this era of comedies when you're first starting, apart from the Marx Brothers, obviously, you're getting the.
It's wit.
You're getting that in as well, and the innocence of the Norman character. He can get away with these sort of jokes because, and part of it is he just being cheeky or is it just
exactly? You don't know, and he's good at. I think he's good at playing that. The sort of, I mean, he's good at it, But there are moments where I say that. Just think, there are moments where I think I'm not quite sure if they know exactly themselves.
Yeah.
It has a bit of a feel of sometimes he does know, and then sometimes he is just being really stupid. And it's like, does he just wake up one day just being a bit more stupid or something? You know, like it's almost like he's more than one person in there, sort of thing. I don't know.
And it's very. I mean, you get the sentimental bits. It is very Chaplin.
Yeah.
But this humour, I mean, it went on for. Maybe the American audience is different, but the Norman Wisdom character reminds me a lot of later on in the 80s. You had the Ernest P. Worrell, where Ernest Goes to Camp. We've done a podcast on that in the past. Same sort of thing. He's even got a cap on.
Yeah.
Very, like, he's always the underdog. He's always got Norman tends to have the bad job but wants a better job. He wants to better himself. Not so much in this one, but in other films he does.
Right.
And he plays the everyman. It's one of these, it's say crowd pleaser, but it's to lift the audience. It's just they're going to come out of these films. Yeah, the man's been taken down by the underdog.
Yeah, that's clearly the overall, what they want to achieve. Like you say, making the audience feel by the end of the film, like, I might have been having a bit of a rubbish day, but now I'm picked up, sort of thing.
Yeah,
and I mean, he does it well. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
I'm in no way, for the faults that I feel within the story, the plot, and the writing in certain bits and whatever. Norman Wisdom himself, as a comedic actor, and just I suppose maybe even an actor in general, or certainly a performer as a worker, he's great. He's good at. He's solid. And he should be sort of remembered for that. I think.
And with the film, I mean, it got really sort of average to bad reviews.
Oh yeah, I read about this.
Routine comedy.
Poor. I mean, there was one that was really scathing about it. Just really talking like poorly about the comedy itself. Like just being like, I can't remember what it was, but just awful. Like just really unhappy with the kind of comedy. There are too many sex jokes and things like that in it, and just
really?
This kind of thing about it being.
I suppose for the time, but now, I mean, it's still a U certificate, and it should be a U certificate.
It's probably just some awful person who just hates any kind of comedy at all.
And there's nothing highbrow about it at all. But then when you look at how these jokes are put together. Some of it's really clever, especially how they filmed the set pieces to look like the Q joke. That would have taken a long time to choreograph.
Yeah, sure.
I think it's a shame that for films like this, it's kind of seen as almost trashy, and they were probably seen more then than they are now as that, because there was more of them. But if you look at how you compare this to, I mentioned that when comedy was kind of big again in the 90s with films like Dumb and Dumber and this sort of thing, I think that the humour's probably done a lot better in these films, and how the jokes are just executed.
I agree. Certainly the way that they do the set pieces is that's because that's what the films are for ultimately. Are to say, hey, look, here's these little moments in the film, which are many, where we're going to do a setup, and then there's going to be the physical punchline and everything, and you're going to laugh your head off because it's hilarious, and it's got to be done right. It has to be done right, and it would be a lot of preparation and working on it and everything else before they get to actually shooting the film, because the films themselves aren't that expensive. These are quite cheaply made movies, and I think a lot of what goes into the film would have happened before the films were made. Like I say, we're talking about probably a lot of things that he would have done before or worked on in certain respects. I'm sure he had a lot to do with completely the choreographing of the pieces. This is what these films rely on, are those moments happening right, and they're not sick or like 90s comedy sort of really just either disgusting things or things that gross type stuff. This is still a time like the Buster Keatons and things where you're really needing to work hard on making sure that the little things are right, are perfect. Yeah, the movements are right.
Yeah.
And so I love that. I love watching that because I hadn't seen any of his films before. So it was really nice to see sort of someone in Britain, a British comic who hasn't gone to the States yet. He does go to the States, but he hadn't yet. Doing this sort of thing, that kind of physical humour, and not trying to be an American as well, which I like.
If anything, it's he's kind of homage to, say, Chaplin, which I know are American films, but he was an English English actor, comedian.
Yeah.
So he's very British, and it's even it's made by Rank, and the hitting of the bell again is very filmed at Pinewood Studios as well.
Absolutely.
So very
so the Rank organisation, extremely famous, British film company. They made at Pinewood again.
But sort of going back to something you said earlier, it's like with the way the comedy is, people will come out of these films. Or will come out of these films thinking, wow, the bit on the ladder when he gets out of prison. They're not going, oh my god, they got Reginald back. You know what I mean? It's not about the plot.
It's not about the plot. It's not at all. It's about the set pieces, which are great, and they are. There was not one that I thought was poor. I thought they were all, they were all for the time top notch. I mean, again, like I say, not expensive. These are not like some things you might have seen in Hollywood, right? This is done on a fairly low key level, and done with what they can and what they could use. And I love that though, because it's still do a fantastic job. It's clearly not big budget, but it doesn't look cheap. No, exactly.
It looks real in a way. When a lot of it would have been filmed in a studio. Which is great. A couple of things I haven't mentioned. Obviously, you've said you've not seen Norman Wisdom film before. Were you expecting him to shout Mr. Grimsdale and see the character Mr. Grimsdale, which is kind of which I
was hoping not necessarily.
You don't want to see.
I didn't want it to be like all the worst things that I ever hear about Norman Wisdom. I wanted to see I wanted to see what I got for the most part, which was him doing his more physical type stuff.
I've always thought it's a shame that his catchphrase is referencing another character. Who isn't in all of his films. The character Mr. Grimsdale I think is great. He always plays his pompous boss, who Norman always does all the work, and he's like feet up. He's actually it's an interesting dynamic because he's a likeable boss. He's not like this horrible. He needs Norman, but he manipulates him. But that's not in it. Which might be one of the reasons it stood out for me, because it was that funny and it didn't have what you expected from the Norman Wisdom films. And what did you think of my personal favourite character, Harold the hamster? That's a weird thing just there.
I was not overly impressed with that, just because there's no point. There is a joke in it with the hamster, which I was thinking, right, so when is this hamster going to play any part with the comedy, with the routines? And so there's one bit which I just thought, ugh, really?
What, towards the end?
So he's in the dress, and
Well, I think it's there for another little bit of the sentimental stuff. And when he writes a letter to Jeannie when he's been fired, and I think it's so he's got someone to talk to, and he talks to the hamster. But the hamster seems to live in this tiny little cruel cage, or in his pocket, through the whole film. Which is weird,
very strange.
But I do like the bit when he's writing the letter, he covers it up so the hamster can't read it. I like that little bit. So,
do you know what? I did not clock that. I was wondering, what are you doing, dude? And so that's what he was doing. He was hiding it from the hamster's eyes. Okay.
But also it's something that kids would like.
Of course. I mean, this is for the little kids. You go, oh yeah, hamster. And Janie likes the hamster as well. They she's fine with it, which is obviously important, because if she didn't, then it's like it's either me or the hamster kind of thing.
It'd be great if the hamster had got a spin-off movie, Harry Met Norman.
It's Harold, isn't it?
Harold, yeah,
Harold the hamster.
which I named my first hamster after. When I was a kid,
right.
Harold.
So yeah, I mean, I wasn't overly impressed with this. Not because of animal cruelty or anything like that. I just didn't think there was much.
Yeah, I think
really.
This doesn't happen in his other films. He's
really
not like known to have a hamster.
Oh, okay.
I think they're just trying something.
Yeah, clearly. Right.
It's quite nice that, but
it wasn't bad. It just wasn't any. It wasn't.
It's just one of the things that was just there.
Yeah.
It'd have been nice if they'd have had the budget. There might have been a nice little, I don't know. The hamster does something to see.
Maybe
they can.
But like I said, I don't like the whole hamster running around in someone's clothes gag.
Yeah, it is weird. But they could have done something different with it. He could have, I don't know, done something else. He could have stolen something, a little bit, what would have been information for where, I don't know, they could have made it a bit more.
Sure, you could have, actually used it as a way of, either getting information or getting, doing something that further along, furthers Norman's, whatever, prospects in some kind of way.
Yeah, but I mean, it's there. It's like, it's a bit weird. And I generally think, as I just said, they're trying something different.
Yeah, sure.
And they're, I mean, it's kind of, it's 90 minutes. A lot happens in it. Comic wise, did any of it feel boring to you, or did you?
Yeah, like I say, in the middle, and bits with the whole romantic element to it. I just was like, oh, really, just get on with it, sort of thing.
You see my point about how they put these in these films. I generally think it is so the kids can have a break.
Sure, and the song again, I know nothing of Wisdom's career as a singer. Was not overly impressed. To be perfectly honest, nothing poor about it necessarily. It does not fit the character though at all.
His voice changes.
Yeah,
it's obviously him.
Yes,
he's got this big
kind of voice. It's like, okay, now you are somebody else, dude. This is not the character Norman in the film.
But in that romantic scene where he's meant to meet her at the fair, and he doesn't think he can make it. She's just sat on this ride by herself. She's going to go on the big ride by herself. Would she do that? Would she go on? That's weird.
I don't. Yes.
And then later on in the film, he's supposed to meet her somewhere else, and then he gets arrested or something. That's not even. They don't even get back to that.
Yeah.
He's supposed to meet her somewhere, and he doesn't. And then she's just fine with it.
Yeah. This is the problem with the writing for female characters at this time. And for many decades, in fact, where ladies just there as a prop, basically, and when they need her, there she'll be, completely fine and dandy, doing what she needs to do. It's bad. It's just straight up bad.
I do like, as I mentioned earlier, this shouting going outside. I did like that how she was the one who asked him out. That's different for the time. But that's the only thing that really is.
There's so much where she looks just dead behind the eyes, like she's not even, like just. I don't know how to describe it. Like it's something I'd seen a lot in films of this era, where especially sort of comedies or light-hearted films, where women are just over the top, madly in love with someone to the point where they've just forgotten everything else in their lives, and you can just, in their eyes, it's just meant to. They're told, I'm sure, we're told to just look in love. Right, just look in love, and it becomes just looking like you're just dead, almost like you just
I mean, as much as I don't really like how this other girl just gets angry. But they could have bounced off each other for some comedy more.
There's a little bit. Any of it.
There's a little bit.
Tiny bit.
Like when they're both watching the football and they're cheering him on louder. But they don't even talk to each other. They could have had a conversation, couldn't they? So, have you ever actually had a conversation with Norman? Well, no. He just falls about, and isn't that brilliant?
And says things like, I didn't think you'd like me, or which it's like, what? Indeed.
So he's playing football. He's a hamster in his jersey now.
Again, another thing which I'd rather not think about it.
You briefly see his house, which is just like a bed and a hamster cage. I don't know where he lives. It looks like he's in a shed or. I mean, he's a working class gent doing the windows in a very
rich person's mansion.
Yeah.
His quarters are going to look rubbish, aren't they?
He does a lot of damage to the place.
Does, which it does not go unnoticed, and he does end up having to pay for it out of his wages.
Yeah,
so
a lot. Even the stuff which isn't him. And he's told to keep off the grass a lot.
Yes, which he then he does a callback to that.
Yeah, right.
To the Major.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those. It's a Norman Wisdom vehicle, but I do think some of the performances, especially sort of I don't want to say villains, but the people at the manor, the posh lot, the authority.
Yeah,
I think there's some great performances.
They're good. It's good fun, It's always nice to see. It's always fun to see posh people getting upset, isn't it?
So I mean, firstly, do you think you've enjoyed this a lot more when you was younger?
Oh,
yeah,
completely.
Yeah, that's good. Because it is. Weirdly, I mean, a lot of people now. I look online in the groups, and hopefully I'll post this in a group, and people might listen. But it's people a lot older than me who seem to be the big fans.
Yeah.
I know of people my age who, at the time, it was like, this is my little thing that my parents, my grandparents show me. But I wasn't alone. So many people I later find out were watching these films as well. I mean, that's why they were shown on TV. They knew that people would be showing them to their kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Really liked it, and it's one of these. I think it's only now that they're not being shown anymore. If they are, it's for pensioners are watching them on during the day. But I mean, things don't live forever, and maybe there will be 10 years down the line, slapstick will come back again somehow.
Maybe.
But for me, I loved watching these films as a kid, and I can still put them on. I don't laugh out loud.
No.
I'll chuckle a bit.
Yeah.
More the lines in it than the. But they still pass an hour and a half. It's kind of comfort TV, I suppose. And it's just. I mean, I forgot the DVDs, which are. You see them more in charity shops now than you do. I mean, I think there's a box set currently available. They're not on any streaming things, nor are any of these, to my knowledge.
Right.
Not on Amazon and stuff. I mean, they're available to watch by other means.
Yeah.
So someone's putting them up there for. Then probably they're quite slack on the copyright of them, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned that I saw them online, and I think that they probably are fine with that happening.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's, again, like the copyright. It might be public domain now, maybe. I mean, Rank hasn't existed for nearly 30 years. But I'm sure someone at some point probably bought the rights. But it may be now.
I mean, looking at some of the DVDs I've got, some are on Carlton.
And, Carlton Television.
And this one is, which I don't know if it exists anymore. The Up in the World DVDs on Cinema Club.
All right.
Which I remember more as videos. They were like, videos were like $10.99. These were the $5.99 ones.
Yeah.
There's some of them as well, and not this one, but they've got like commentaries by Norman Wisdom with a film historian. So if you're into the films, would recommend picking up the DVD. Some of them, he's just sort of, it's like an interview really while the film was playing.
Yeah,
he must have been in his 80s when he done that,
right?
Because he's been gone over a decade now.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's one of those. I mean, I'm glad you gave it a go, and it seems like.
Well, I mean, I give anything a go.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it. I did. I mean, I didn't like love it or anything like that, but I certainly, like I say, enjoyed it and was impressed with the physical comedy. Like I say, you seem to like now chuckling at more of the phrases and things that are said that are sort of like play on words and whatever. And I mean, I wasn't overly impressed with that. I saw it, I could hear it, and go, "Oh, okay, that's there." But I really was more wanting to see the physical stuff because I hadn't seen it. Before. I hadn't seen him before properly.
Yeah.
So I was really wanting to.
Well, I think that's. I mean, I'd have seen this film dozens of times.
Yeah.
So there's with the physical stuff, I knew exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're a kid, you're wanting the physical stuff. And so I'd forgotten. I knew what set piece was coming up. I knew that he was going to cover himself in the ink.
Yes, great.
And all that stuff. But I'd forgotten these things like why what happened. I've forgotten the lines. So I'm not saying it's because they're exceptionally funny. It's because
I understand,
that's what you know. Some of them are, but then it's not overkill with that either. There's not like
No. There's nothing that's. I mean, apart from, like I say, at times the voice was grating, and I was worried that there was going to be lots of it. There was at times a bit like the bit, right? Okay, so the bit where he keeps coming back, right? The grass part, keep off the grass, and he keeps coming back, and I just, I don't like that. That part I was really, oh no, please, that's bad.
You didn't want that for the whole film.
No, God, no.
But also, you know, there's only one song in it, and that was enough.
Oh yeah, again, like it was just. I mean, I was fascinated by. I knew that it was probably going to come, and I knew it was probably going to be in the middle, which it was, because that's the classic way of doing it. And I was interested to hear his voice, and then just fascinated by it. Whilst I wasn't really interested in what he was saying, you know, awful, boring, silly love song. But yeah, just okay. That voice is not this character.
Well, his sort of anthem really, "Don't Laugh at Me," which he'd do in his comedy act right till the end. Is just like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, it's not even like a crooner type thing. It's just this old-fashioned, which was the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's music hall. That's what it is. And I that's fine. It's just for me personally, like, it just does not fit. And I'm sure at the time it did fit perfectly.
I think as well these songs. I mean, all the slapsticks for the kids, they probably threw that in for the parents.
Yeah, absolutely, of course.
But it's a shame that because he was clearly into his sort of rock and roll stuff with the drummer. If he'd have gone into
well, like I say, that was like some proper, like, you know, Gene Krupa style, swing jazz kind of just it's brilliant, it's great, and it's just bam bam bam.
And Morris joins in.
And he was really happy about it too. See, that's it. I mean, characters like that, the characters that are supposed to be the ooh, I'm proper and everything, and then they go, yeah, I want that. That's what I want. A bit of fun.
Oh no! Well, when Morris accidentally gets kidnapped.
Joel.
Poor Morris.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I felt for him. I do. It's the only character I really felt for
he means well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Whereas, thing with the Norman character is he's so used to. Don't really want to swear because there might be old people listening who don't like it, but he's so used to getting shit on that Norman just accepts that he's fired and just carried on. It could have been like a shorter film. Just moves on to cause trouble the next place he works at. But yeah, I mean, there's so many. I don't know if you know that Some Mothers Do Have Them that was originally written with Norman Wisdom in mind.
Oh, okay.
It would have been quite different.
It would have.
But the characters are quite alike, but Frank Spencer is far more annoying. And with Norman, I think he'd probably end up like, I don't know, accidentally tie my shoelaces together and I'd go over somehow.
Yeah.
But I think that character you could have a pint with and you could have a laugh. Whereas some slapstick characters are just like, just go away.
Yes.
And Frank Spencer is one of those.
Yeah, fair enough.
And,
I did like him as a child, but I was at the same time I was always a bit scared of him as a kid because I was like, okay, there's something really wrong with this man.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, he's it's weird, isn't it? But I think that's obviously influenced by this sort of thing, and they've almost taken the human out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whereas they go full swing, but they absolutely own it with Mr. Bean.
Yes,
because that is like he's an arsehole, and he accepts it, and you're not, in a way, you're not even meant to like.
It's
Mr.
not
Bean.
Human. There's not a human there. This is like the bit where just. Quick thing about Bean, because this always fascinated me when it first started as a kid. I was just fascinated by this character falls out of the sky, and that's it, and you know nothing about him and stuff. I thought, what is he? Does he come from? Is he an alien, or has he been like thrown out of heaven or something for being really annoying? You know, like
when I was a kid, I saw that he was an alien, and there they just sort of don't.
Yeah, it's not. I don't think they ever. There was a necessarily. No. It was just like, okay, he's just bam. Now he's here on Earth or wherever, sort of.
Because it would have been really crap if when they done the B movie, it was like him from his planet.
Yeah, oh god,
that'd have been terrible. But but surprised they didn't do that.
Exactly. He's not a human. He's not a human as in like with the full characteristics of what it is to make up a human, where obviously the Norman character does have that in him. You go, okay, you can kind of get where he would have come from, like you know how he's grown up, maybe like what his parents would have been like, you know, this kind of thing. Yeah. But the further on we go with these kind of characters, they remove all of that. You know, it just becomes less and less.
This is like the middle ground for slapstick cinema. You've got the early silent, then you've got this sort of era, then later on you've got the Mr. Bean, that sort of. So that's another reason I think it works so well, because it takes stuff from the early things that influenced it, which are great. But then you can also see how this has influenced things later, and that's kind of an interesting look if you step back and look at the history of comedy, which I do think is kind of dying. I think comedy, slapstick comedy, especially in movies now, is more animated. You know, where people would have gone to see a family, even up to the 80s when there'd been things like The Great Outdoors and that sort of American style comedy. Now you'll go and see a Pixar film. Yeah. And then comedy is more TV, I suppose. Yeah. And there's so much stand-up now on TV, whereas it used to be someone would be a stand-up and then you might see a little bit on a variety show, and then you'd see them in a film or on a TV show. Yeah,
sure. I mean, stand-up obviously was more for the live, being a live thing that you would generally go see live. If you were extremely famous, you might get a special or something here and there. You know, and there were a fair few of them through the 80s and 90s and stuff. But it's got crazy now, just absolutely crazy.
There's just a cheap to make. Film a show. Well, I have got a Norman Wisdom from the 80s, a DVD of his tour. And it's a lot of it's just, you know, he's done the same sort of thing live for decades. But that's what he done. People paid to see his name, and then there'd be a show around him. You'd have dancers, singers before, and that's what I saw as my introduction to stand-up comedy.
Shows,
was him seeing he was the first act I ever saw live, probably the first comedy I ever saw live, and that's why I know this is about films I think should be cult movies. This got bad reviews, that's why I think it fits into what I could do. Probably was, it must have been a big hit when it came out.
I'm sure it was.
I know one of his films was at number one. Well, I don't know if it's true, I've read this. When Dr. No came out, number
62.
one, the Norman Wisdom film was at number one in the box office when that came out. I haven't followed. I've read that, so I don't know if it's true or not.
That's 6 years after this one. And this is his fourth film. I think. So 6 years later, I mean, he's probably made another 5, or something.
I think he made something like starring roles about 12 in total.
Wow. Right. And I'm sure not in not a very long space of time either.
Probably in about. Somewhere in colour in the mid 60s, so it's he probably had like a good 10 years of being massive, and he never really broke. Later on he had a few TV shows which you can't really find anymore, so then his career was basically stage work again, but that's how, I don't see that's him. That's how cinema changed, and it's the same with, you look at Hammer films. I mean, there was loads of them, but that wasn't that long a time they were around for. A couple of decades.
As big, as fairly, in Britain especially as big things, you know, constantly being made and everyone going, right, got to go see the new Hammer film. It was a couple of decades.
And then it early 70s, it and that was because things like The Exorcist had come out, and horror
the whole type of Hammer horror films had just become passé by the sort of the early 70s.
And I suppose it's the same with this style of comedy. We mentioned Python earlier and things like that, but everything evolves, and I think he'll always be remembered in comedy, and I think the reason that he's not probably remembered as well as some may have thought he would have been is because you had the Chaplins and Buster Keatons before, and he's just sort of later, and a lot of, it's hard to kind of realise how big he was. It's the closest I can think is for our generation of going back to the 90s, that's where we'd have been teenagers, is when Jim Carrey first hit the scene. And a Jim Carrey film would come out, and it weren't as long as this, but there was probably about 4 or 5 years where Jim Carrey film, got to go see it, it'll be hilarious.
You just did go see them because they were going to be massive hits, and
belly laughs.
That you'd go. You know, I'm personally never been a massive fan of Jim Carrey, but I did go see them just because
Everyone
you did. You know,
I thought I really liked them at the time, and now I'd rather watch him in a serious role. 'Cause I think he's a good actor.
that's the. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, I did like Dumb and Dumber.
Yeah.
Just because more for Jeff Daniels.
Yeah,
better.
Yeah. But that was just laugh after laugh at the time. I remember howling with laughter at that when it came out, and I haven't seen it for years. I saw the sequel and didn't think much of it.
Yeah.
But it was of its time, and it's that stuff hadn't been done, and then it was overkill with that sort of humour.
Very quickly as well. They just churning these kind of films out. So.
Briefly mention, you did mention it earlier about, you said how he hadn't gone to America yet. He only briefly done one film in America. I don't know if you've, The Night They Raided Misty, I think it was called. It was Jason Robards, is that his name? The guy, actor. He was in The Dad in Parenthood. He's in a lot of westerns. A film about a nightclub, and Norman Wisdom's one of the performers. He's the comedy relief in this film.
Right.
I think Brett Eklund's in it as well.
Okay.
I've only seen it once.
I've never heard of it. So,
and Norman went to America. The film done okay. He got really high praise for it. And the story is that he came back for family in this country and didn't work in America again.
Right. So he could have had a career in the States.
That's what I heard.
The thing.
Yeah, he could have gone on to... which would have been nice. He could have gone the way of Peter Sallis or somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice that he didn't.
I agree.
He might have gone to that era of time.
Yeah.
I mean, his later films got a little bit criticised because they... Nothing to the extent of, say, even the Carry On films, but they were later on more sex jokes.
Of course, it's the 60s and stuff,
and one of them is like he falls in love with a young hippie, and it's like, it's alright, but it's not. What's Good for the Goose, it's called, but probably his weakest starring role and probably his last. I think it's his last. But it would have been a shame to see him go to America and then become something that he's not.
Yeah.
Which could have happened.
Probably would have as well. To be perfectly honest, I quite like the idea of him not going to the States and really trying really hard for a career over there. Probably kept him alive not going to the States for as long as he did, because I'm sure he was very happy here. Not having to try so hard at being like, I don't know, like you just say becoming someone else.
And
to appease other people.
I met fairly recently, last year, an actor who was in a play locally who went on tour and worked with Norman Wisdom. I mean, the actor would have been, though I don't want to say who it is, not very famous, but he's been in films and stuff as well, mainly stage. I reckon he'd be 60s now, early 60s, possibly late 50s, and he loved him. He was just like, he was a performer all the time. He loved the audience. Story about how their coach was in traffic once, or there was a kids bus, and Norman got in the road and was entertaining these kids while they were all in traffic. The kids didn't know who he was because they wouldn't, right? And this is 20 years ago, so probably they wouldn't have known who he was. And he was just making them all laugh. Everyone laughed, and he loved it. He thrived on it. And he's the sort of person that you don't really hear anything bad about him,
right?
Apart from he was very career minded. But no, you hear bad things about people like Peter Sallis and loads of people from that era, but you don't of Norman Wisdom. And I think it was just his life was his job. I'll quickly add it. Another little story was his kid. He did separate from his wife. His kids, they were very strict about TV. They weren't allowed to watch TV on a Sunday.
Right.
And it was the day of the Cup final, 1966.
Right.
And he was like, "You're not watching it because it's the rules." And they were like really upset. He's like, "Well, we'll go out for a drive." Obviously, he drove them to Wembley, had tickets, and they all went to see it.
Right.
Which is a nice thing to do. But
beautiful. Yeah, that's very.
It's a bit horrible. It's a bit like, I am nice. But there's lots of little stories like that, and he's got a biography which is really interesting. His story isn't far away from Charlie Chaplin's, and that sort of Oliver Twist. How he was brought up.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And there was a one-man stage show at the Wolsey Theatre about him fairly recently as well, which is brilliant. I can't remember the name who done it, but the guy who done it is amazing. So I suppose in that way it lives on, but I just feel 20 years time, I don't think people will be talking about his films.
Probably, maybe not. I don't know. of course, he's not going to be remembered as they say, the older ones from the silent era, from Hollywood and things. But even them, people don't talk about them the way people used to just 20 years ago, you know.
Yeah.
And they say in another 20 years it'll probably be even less.
Yeah.
Unless there's some big revival, I don't know.
It's strange because with things like Chaplin, there's so many films now will be come up to like the 100th anniversary.
Yeah.
And you're not really hearing it.
We would have had the Kids 100th anniversary last year. You know, so it's not going to be long till some of the really big ones come along for 100 years. I mean, the cinema probably will do them if we're still open. Hopefully we'll be that
would be I've not
a decade's time.
I've never seen a Chaplin film or Lauren Hardy film or anything like that on the big screen,
right?
And it would be really nice.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to see a Norman Wisdom on the big screen, but they are that sort of remembered fondly watching on TV. That is for me that's how I see them.
Yeah.
Same. We mentioned Hammer as well. I was listening to another podcast about some expert of Hammer, who's a writer who loves Hammer, said never seen one on the big screen.
Right.
But I think we all grew up with them on TV. And
sure.
So
I've seen some on the big screen, but of course, grew up with them on television, of course.
Yeah. I'm going to quickly get a rating out of 5 from you.
For it on its technicality, as far as the pieces go, I'd say 4.
Yeah.
But overall, as a movie, you know, it's probably a 3, really. Overall, as a film, but you know, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean,
a lot.
It does what it sets out.
So I say 3.5.
Yeah. I mean, I'd give it personally. Years ago, I'd have given this a 5. I'd give it a 4 because it does exactly what it's supposed to. It's entertaining.
Yeah.
It's just not. There's better films.
Yeah.
What they're the same sort of thing.
Yeah, sure.
But it's a really likeable film, and the time flies by, and it always cheers me up.
Yeah.
So,
fair enough. That makes sense.
Yeah. Just before we wrap it up, have you watched anything recently that you think would go on to be a cult classic, or should, in your recent watching? I'll put you on the spot here a bit.
You have, actually. I suppose something that's recently come out.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's always it's always a tricky thing.
Yeah.
Because just the idea of thinking about what might become later on down the line is seen as
maybe not might,
special.
but should. Maybe someone's gone under the radar, and you think, hang on, this is not actually.
No. I can't right at this moment. No. I'm sure there will be. I reckon in 5 minutes' time, after we've stopped this, I'll have things in my head.
You keep that question in mind for the next time we do a podcast.
Yeah.
And I should have really warned you.
See, my brain's like going, what have we shown recently that I thought was really good, like really good, that people didn't really notice. I can't.
The one I'd think of, I did see at your cinema, was Brian and Charles, but that's doing quite well anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, maybe that might become like it probably not do incredibly well. I don't know, because I don't think it'd already been shown in too many places.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, when it gets streaming, maybe people will see it more and it will get talked about.
But critically, it's doing pretty well.
But that's it. But critically, there's I mean, how do you want to rate these things? I mean, critically, a lot of films do well that the public don't like, and then maybe 10, 20 years down the line, the public will like them. That's the whole thing about sort of a cult film.
Yeah,
necessarily, works on those kind of ways. But then you can have cult films like Star Wars, which were the other way around.
Yeah,
like
it's mental how Star Wars didn't get great reviews.
Yeah, and generally was just seen as because sci-fi was not big. It was not, especially that kind of science fiction was not something that was taken seriously at all. Yeah,
just thinking as well that around that time, like mid-70s, late 70s, if Norman Wisdom had gone. He could to Hollywood. He could have ended up being like the old bloke in Buck Rogers or something.
Yeah,
and that would have been sad.
Yeah,
or hilarious.
Indeed, it might have been both.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sadly
There
hilarious.
he is.
Tears of a
The clown, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, and on that uplifting note.
On that bombshell.
Yeah, and we've been talking about Norman Wisdom's Up in the World for 1 hour 15 minutes, which is nearly as long as the film.
Woohoo!
So thank you very much for joining me. We'll get you back soon. We'll be on season. This is going to be a special in between seasons. I've decided. So we'll get you back for season 3.
All right.
We're going to mix the films up because I think people expect mainly sort of horror and weirder films, and I'm like, well, just want to do films in general. Films. I mean, this was massive for its day, but I bet you 90% of people who've listened to this podcast haven't seen a single Norman Wisdom film.
Yeah, probably not.
Hopefully they will.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. See you later.
Thanks for listening, guys. That was a longer one. I thought this would be a short little special, but we had lots to talk about. Huge thanks, as I say, to James. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify. If you're listening on Spotify, we're on Anchor as well. Follow on there. Share about. If you could hit like, do whatever you can. 5-star reviews always help. If you be kind enough to give us one of those, that way it might reach a wider audience. Tell your mates. I'm going to put this, as I said, in some Norman Wisdom groups as well, so we might pick up some older listeners, old or new fans to these movies. Do comment on the Facebook groups, on the Instagram. Find us, share, talk. I'm happy to talk about movies 24/7. Thanks a lot. We'll be back. It'll probably be season 3 next. I think this is going to be like a mid-episode for more weirder films. I mentioned on the last one that I'm going to be doing The Shadow and Dick Tracy. 2 films from the 90s in the next season, but there'll be loads more, and people are going to throw some films at me. I'm going to be doing an episode on the 1987 sort of sci-fi thriller The Hidden, a film that I've only recently watched that James recommended to me, so we're going to reverse it for that. We'll be back very soon. Thank you very much, and keep watching those movies, guys.